Welcome back to our exploration of Daniel. Today we delve into the fascinating structure of this prophetic book. Understanding its unique design will not only enrich our appreciation for its artistic and literary style, but also deepen our grasp of its powerful message. As James Hamilton aptly describes in his book, With the Clouds of Heaven, the book of Daniel is a carefully constructed chiasm. But what does that mean? A chiasm is a literary structure where the main points are arranged symmetrically, like a mirror image, with the central point being the most important. In Daniel, the central point is the awe-inspiring vision of the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man in chapter 7. This pivotal vision acts as the heart of the book, radiating its meaning outward to the surrounding chapters. Think of it like a bridge. The central vision is the highest point, connecting the two halves of the book. The first half, chapters 2 through 6, focuses on historical events and the rise and the fall of earthly kingdoms, while the second half, chapters 8 through 12, delves into more detailed prophecies concerning the end times and the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom. A unique feature of Daniel is its use of two languages, Aramaic, chapters 2 through 7, and Hebrew, chapters 8 through 12. This linguistic shift is not accidental but intentional. Aramaic was the language of the Babylonian Empire, while Hebrew was the language of God's people. The use of Aramaic in the first half of the book reflects the historical context of Daniel's time in exile, while the shift to the Hebrew in the second half signifies a transition from earthly kingdoms to God's heavenly kingdom. This change in language also highlights the book's theological message. The earthly kingdoms, powerful as they may be, are temporary and will eventually fade away, while God's kingdom is eternal and will ultimately prevail. The chiastic structure of Daniel serves several purposes. First, it establishes and emphasizes the central message of God's sovereignty over the nations and his ultimate victory over evil. The central vision of the Son of Man receiving dominion and glory reinforces this message, assuring us God's kingdom will ultimately triumph. Second, the structure highlights the themes of judgment and hope. The first half of the book depicts the judgment of earthly kingdoms and the consequences of rebellion against God. The second half, however, offers hope for the future, as it reveals the coming of God's eternal kingdom and the vindication of his faithful people. Finally, the chiastic structure underscores the importance of faithfulness in the face of persecution. Throughout the book, we see Daniel and his companions refusing to compromise their faith, even at the risk of their lives. Their unwavering loyalty to God serves as an inspiring example for us today. Let's briefly explore some key chapters and their significance within this chiastic structure. Daniel 2, where Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a statue reveals the succession of world empires and the eventual establishment of God's kingdom. In Daniel 3, the fiery furnace, a story highlighting the faithfulness of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to bow down to the golden image. In Daniel 7, the central vision of the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man reveals God's judgment of the nations and the coming of his eternal kingdom. And then lastly, in Daniel 9, Daniel's prayer for Israel and the prophecy of the 70 weeks provide a detailed timeline for God's plan of redemption. Understanding the structure of Daniel unlocks a deeper appreciation for its message. The chiastic structure, the use of two languages, and the interplay of historical events and prophetic visions all contribute to a rich tapestry that reveals God's sovereignty, judgment, and ultimate triumph. As we continue our study of Daniel, let us be attentive to these structural elements and allow them to deepen our understanding of God's Word and His plan for the world. There are some additional details about this chiastic structure that you might find interesting. In his book, With the Clouds of Heaven, James Hamilton argues for a chiastic structure in the book of Daniel, emphasizing that it's a carefully constructed literary device that reinforces the book's theological message. He identifies several key elements that support this chiastic structure. I'll list them and then describe them. The overall structure, there's a matching stories, There's a thematic parallel, there's linguistic shift, and lastly, reinforcement of the message. Concerning the overall structure, Hamilton proposes that the book as a whole forms a chiasm, with the central point being the vision of the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man in chapter 7. The chapters surrounding the central vision mirror each other in themes and content. Under matching stories, he highlights the parallel stories of the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4 and Belshazzar in chapter 5 as the central points of the chiasm. These stories, while involving different kings, both emphasize the theme of divine judgment against human pride and arrogance. Concerning thematic parallels, Hamilton identifies several thematic parallels between the chapters that support the chiastic structure. For instance, the opening chapter, Daniel 1, with the exile of the Jews to Babylon, is mirrored by the concluding chapters, Daniel 10 through 12, with the vision of the return from exile. Similarly, the dream interpretations in chapter 2 and 7 mirror each other, both revealing the rise and the fall of kingdoms and the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom. The linguistic shift. The books shift from Aramaic in chapters 2 through 7 to Hebrew in chapters 8 through 12 also support the chiastic structure. The Aramaic sections focus on earthly kingdoms, while the Hebrew sections focus on heavenly perspective, with the central vision, chapter 7, serving as the transitional point between the two. And lastly, the reinforcement of the message. Hamilton argues that the chiastic structure is not merely a literary device, but serves to reinforce the book's central theological message. By arranging the material in a symmetrical pattern, the author emphasizes God's sovereignty over the nations, his judgment against human pride, and the ultimate triumph of his eternal kingdom. It is important to note that not all scholars agree with Hamilton's proposed chiastic structure for Daniel. Some argue that the parallels he identifies are not as clear-cut as he suggests, and that other interpretations of the book structure are possible. Nevertheless, Hamilton's analysis offers a compelling perspective on how the literary structure of Daniel can deepen our understanding of its theological message.